Good afternoon, everybody. A very warm welcome to the next edition of the IRMI webinar series. For those of you who are new to IRMI or the India Research Management Initiative, this is an initiative of the India Alliance conceptualized and developed in 2019. And the goal of IRMI really is to contribute towards building robust research ecosystems in India through building capacity for research management and creating a community of practice for research managers in India. And since June 2020, we've been curating webinars on various aspects of research management. And this has been a wonderful platform to learn more about research management and about activities that impact the work of researchers all across India's research institutes. So it's a pleasure and very nice to finally be able to see this webinar taking shape today on managing statutory compliances for human research. We have a wonderful, eminent group of panelists here today, and we also have Vidya Krishnamurthy from THSTI. Vidya is the technical manager for grants coordination at THSTI, and she's also the member secretary for the THSTI Institutional Ethics Committee. And Vidya is going to moderate today's webinar. And without much further ado, I hand over to Vidya to take forward. Vidya, the stage is yours. And thank you everyone for joining.
Thank you, Dr. Savita. Once again, it's my privilege and pleasure to be part of this IRMI initiative. And today we are hoping to present you one of the series in which is much useful for the IRMI community. Once again, welcome to this IRMI webinar session where we have planned to introduce a specific segment of research administration to this community. Maintaining statutory compliances involves researchers as well as administrators. In fact, the administrators play a very major role in streamlining this process. For this purpose, we have invited a set of panelists to help this IRMI community understand how this process works in general and in certain specific research settings. With this, I will introduce the panelists to you. We'll start with Dr. Nandini Kumar. Dr. Kumar, please turn your cam on. Dr. Kumar is a former Deputy General, Director General, Senior Grade from the Indian Council of Medical Research, and she's the current Vice President for the Forum of Ethics Review Committees in India. She has contributed in the formulation of the national ethical guidelines in our country. She's a consultant for bioethics and traditional medicine research activities, including WHO assignments. She is also a national and international surveyor of ethics committees. And she's a member of the ICMR Ethics Advisory Committee. She's active, very active in bioethics curriculum development. Welcome, Dr. Kumar. Our next panelist is none other than Dr. Urmila Tate. Dr. Tate, could you please turn your camera on?
I have turned it on.
Okay, thank you. Dr. Tate is an emeritus professor in the Department of Clinical Pharmacology, Seth GS Medical College and KEM Hospital, Mumbai. She's an active researcher and a well-recognized scientist in the field of clinical pharmacology. She's a secretary at the FERCI. She has also contributed for the development of the National Ethical Guidelines for Biomedical and Health Research involving human participants. She has developed various training modules on the good clinical practices, including an advanced good clinical practice modules, and also on National Drug Safety Monitoring Board guidelines for the Drug Control General of India, that is the CDSAO office, as well as WHO. Welcome, Dr. Tate. And now we have our young India Alliance Yearly Career Research Fellow, Dr. Aastha Aggarwal. Dr. Aastha, please turn your camera on.
I have it. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. Dr. Aggarwal is an assistant professor and a member secretary of the Public Health Foundation of India. In her current research, she is looking at comorbidities of cardiometabolic conditions and depression in adult Indian population and various risk factors, particularly including psychosocial factors. Welcome, Dr. Aggarwal. Finally, as a recorded session, we will have Dr. Jyotsna Dhawan, the current CEO of the India Alliance and a well-known stem cell biologist. Dr. Dhawan was instrumental in establishing the INSTEM in Bengaluru and she has served as its dean. She has been an emeritus scientist at CCMB and professor of Academy of Scientific and Innovative Research. She has been a member of various scientific communities as well as regulatory committees, including the National Apex Committee for the Stem Cell Research and Therapy. With this set of panelists, we are going to start the session. We'll start the session with contribution from each of our panelists sharing their experiences, first in the form of the queries posed by me towards them, and finally we'll be very happy to take question and answers from the IRMI community and post it to the panelists so that you can get a feedback directly from them. And I will start with Dr. Kumar. Dr. Kumar, we want you to set the outline for this session by helping us to understand what are the statutory compliances required to be adhered to when a research infrastructure involving humans is set up in this country, and who are the regulatory bodies, and how is the monitoring done by the Government of India. Thank you, Dr. Kumar. Over to you.
Thank you, Vidya, for the introduction. Good afternoon to all. Can I have my slide presented, please?
Right, sir, Dr. Nandini.
Yeah. So as Vidya had highlighted, there are statutory requirements when you do research, and what are they that I will be briefly touching upon. Can I have the next slide, please? So before we proceed for for the details, I would like you to understand from private sector fundings for research which is held. So the biggest actually chunk of funding goes from the government to the agriculture sector, and this actually will include projects on medicinal plants as well, and mostly about cultivation and potency of the plant ingredients, etc. Besides their other requirements. Next one is DST. I don't know why this pie diagram has come like this, broken, but anyway, we'll manage. So this is DST, and then you have DSIR, then you have DBT, and then DHR. So the other agencies or institutions which fund from the government sector are, of course, the Ministry of Ayush in a big way, and Department of Pharmaceuticals, Atomic Energy, DRDO, and then the University Group, AICTE, and INSA. And I must tell you that this is not a comprehensive list as such, but suffice to understand that there is a lot coming in for health research. Then we have, of course, the private funding. Oh, where did the slide disappear? Okay, so you have actually, I haven't finished the, back to the previous one, please. So anyway, in the private sector, you have the philanthropic agencies, institutions, research institutions, and then we have Indo-foreign funding for that. So the regulatory bodies which come into the picture are for the health interventions, such as the CDSCO, ICMR, FSS, AI, even it is food related as well. Biotech health products, DBT mainly, and it's three committees: IBSC, RC, GM, and GEAC, and DCGI, who is presently termed as CLA, Central Licensing Authority, after the 2019 new drugs and clinical trial rules came about. When you are contemplating international collaboration, it is important to understand that there is a health ministry screening committee which has to approve such a project. Mainly it is for the interest of the researchers, protection of their IP, and also to see that there are no sensitive information going out of the country which could actually jeopardize the interest of the country. Private research institutions have to actually register in DSIR, otherwise they cannot get funding or they get utilize it for research. Life sciences research, Indian Council of Social Science Research is there, although they are not that active as the other agencies, the UGC and ICMR. When it comes to cell or stem cell based research, it is NAC, SCRT, and Drug Controller General of India. Now, for import and exports, besides that meant for the genetically modified products, you have biological materials going out of the country or coming into the country where the Directorate General of Foreign Trade comes into the picture. Now, one thing people generally misunderstand is that the DGFT makes a statement saying that all the issues related to sending out the samples is actually the researcher's responsibility to see that all approvals are in place before the samples are sent abroad. So many researchers think that actually there's no further approval required. But sorry for that interruption. For the DGFT to actually be responsible, DGFT has simply washed off its hands, saying that the responsibility is with the researcher. So from whichever agency it requires approvals, all that should be in place. Then, of course, the National Medical Commission. The National Medical Commission, of course, requires that the researchers follow all the guidelines and regulations of the country. And in case they do violate that, it will be termed as negligence. Next slide, please. Okay. Yeah. So we have, is there any way that I could push off this bar from here? Because it's obstructing my view. I really don't know how to actually push it aside. I'll try to do justice.
Dr. Kumar, you might try opening a tab. Yeah, opening a tab from your own computer, which is not screen, and then you can use it as a reference point while the audience get to see this. That's another option. You can open a tab from your own computer and see that also. And you can go in and then you can ask whenever you are ready to move the slide here, you can request. That's another option.
Well, anyway, we don't have that much of time, so I'm just skipping that, trying to manage from this itself. Are you able to see the whole slide? Because my view is blocked in the bottom part by the bar, that is coming in, which I can't push anywhere. Anyway, the point is that we have the Drugs and Cosmetics Act coming in 1940 and then followed by the rules in 1945. So these take care of all the drugs and cosmetics. And then 1986, we had the Environment Protection Act, which actually is responsible for seeing that the biotech products also come into come under its purview, and biosafety programs are in place. 1989 rules for this act, Environment Protection Act, were created as safety guidelines for genetically modified organisms. 97, we have the Health Ministry Screening Committee stepping in to control the international collaborative studies for the reasons I cited earlier. And then 2001, we have the Indian GCP, 2002 Biodiversity Act, which is very, very relevant when you are doing research with plant and plant products by the Indians, and if there is collaboration with the foreigners. 2009, we had the clinical trial registry of India actually was launched in 2007, but it was made mandatory on 15th June 2009 that all regulatory clinical trials have to be registered in this registry. And 2017, we have had the third revision of ethical guidelines for humans, for children, and the revised stem cell research guidelines. Same year, we have the regulations and guidelines for recombinant DNA research and biocontainment, where a whole lot of requirements have been described, including the import and export of these products. And 2019, we have had the new drugs and clinical trials rules, which was actually absent in the Drugs and Cosmetics Act. So this has streamlined all the amendments that had happened since 2013. In 2020, ICMR brought out another guideline for COVID research as a guidance for ethics committee. And in 2022, we have the amendment to the new drugs and clinical trial rules. These are all pertaining to drugs, biotech products, and life sciences. Next slide, please. When it comes to monitoring, I have just listed the main ones. CDSCO actually goes in as an inspector to monitor what is happening in a particular site or for a particular product if there are multi-sites. Monitor and auditor come to the site from the pharma sponsor's side, and you have the RCGM from DBT to actually review the products, biotech products, and those which are medicinal in nature for therapeutic purposes go to DCTI for the final approval. And DSMB, Data Safety Monitoring Board, is there appointed not for every research, but ideally for those research which have the high risk, as well as the sponsor decides that the sponsor always actually appoints a DSMB to go through the trial data to see whether the trial has to be stopped or continued, and the validity of the data as well. Ethics committee actually is at every site approving the proposal in the beginning before it is actually implemented or initiated. And it also plays a monitoring role mainly for the participant protection. And for stem cell, you have the National Apex Committee for Stem Cell Research and Therapy. The expectations are mainly, why is this monitoring required? It's mainly for protecting the participants, preventing unethical research, and to see that the data that is collected has integrity and can be validated. Next one, please. So the resources you can find out from the websites of these main agencies: DST, DBT, DHR, ICMR, CDSCO, NMC, NAC, SCRT. Of course, DSIR also comes into the picture. And there are these training opportunities that I have noted down here are the national ones. The GCP certification having been launched on 15th August 2021. Presently, they are in the process of actually identifying institutions which can become the training centers for certifying the personnel who will be actually training further. So training of the trainers with ISO certification, research ethics, ethics committee management, and drug regulations. With that, I stop now. Over to you. And thanks for the opportunity. Later, maybe I may be able to come in when there are questions and answer sessions.
Thank you, Dr. Kumar. With that introduction and outline to the statutory compliance requirements and who will be the regulatory authorities, now I invite Dr. Thatte. Dr. Thatte has been an investigator in various drug trials, and anyone who works in an ethics secretariat knows how state-of-art the maintenance of operation SOPs are in KEM. And Dr. Thatte has been actively involved in maintaining that robustness in the ethics committee operations. Dr. Thatte, we would like to hear from you, share your experience in maintaining compliances for clinical trials at your institute. And we also have an understanding that you've been instrumental in promoting the use of an electronic ethics committee management system at several institutions in India. Could you please highlight about this application system and comment on its how efficient it is in streamlining this process? Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Vidya, for introducing me at the beginning. And I will be mainly focusing on the EEC component of the discussion, while in the question answer session, perhaps we can focus on the issues about, in general, clinical trials. The EEC, as has been is proudly known, was co-developed by FERC and PART, utilizing funds from a grant from the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation in 2017. And since 2019, CDSA and the MRC CTU at the UCL, that is in London, are a part of the working group. Now, EEC is an online platform that facilitates the submission of ethics-related applications and their review and/or approval by the Institutional Ethics Committee. So it involves multiple users: the principal investigator, the ethics committee, the members, the secretariat, everybody is involved. And it has been essentially designed in accordance with the National Ethical Guidelines for Biomedical and Health Research Involving Human Participants, the ICMR Guidelines 2017, and it is compliant with the New Drugs and Clinical Trial Rules and the FERC SOPs for ethics committees. It allows for online submission of ethics application and their subsequent review, allows for an electronic, seamless and transparent process of application while ensuring that the data remains confidential. And it is available in two modalities. One is that the institute uses its own forms uploaded as PDFs, or institute uses ICMR common forms for ethics review, and the data is stored in a searchable database and can be used to facilitate future submissions. The access, it is an access-controlled workflow. It is a secure cloud-based software hosted on Microsoft Azure, and the servers are located in India. It's relatively easy installation, although I must say that installation requires a huge contribution from the agency that is getting it installed. That is the secretariat from that agency needs to be committed to using it, because a lot of training is involved, and a lot of the institutions we found have fallen off not using the system because they feel it is complicated when it actually isn't at all complicated. You can generate reports on usage and it leaves an audit trail. So we have streamlined submission and review process. There is a significant saving of time. It provides access controlled workflow, tracks user activity to promote transparency. It increases the data privacy, security, and confidentiality. There is a full tracking, supervision, and archiving of submissions, provides real-time tracking of projects following the Ethics Committee IEC hierarchy, helps in optimal decision making, saves storage space, tremendous saving in printing costs, keeps for both the sponsor, the investigator, as well as the ethics committee, keeps internal and external communication in one place, and you can access anytime and from anywhere. You can access it from your own laptops. The current status is that about 33 institutes and 40 ethics committees, because some institutes like my own have 3 ethics committees or 2 or 3 ethics committees. And the total number of projects that the EEC was submitted in 2021 were over 4,000 projects. And the ICMR common forms are not being used by too many institutes as yet. Why? We don't know why. But it is probably again because you require institutes to become familiar with these forms, and we are waiting for that to happen. Now in May 2020, we took a feedback, a SurveyMonkey feedback from through the IEC Secretariat, and we received 35 responses. And people were using EEC for between 0 to 6 months to more than 3 years. In our case, for example, KM Hospital has been using it for more than 3 years. Most of them said it was easy to use and the intuitiveness was good. The data security also was labeled mostly as good. How would you rate the functionality of the secure login was also rated as good. The functionality for the member secretary to schedule meetings, generate an agenda and minutes of the meeting was also labeled as good by most people. Transparency in the review process and due diligence was also, because of the EEC, was also labeled as good. Of course, many people, I mean, when we asked the question, does the EEC help to save paper? Everybody said that they strongly agreed. Almost everybody said they strongly agreed. If not strongly agreed, they at least agreed. The efficiency of the review process, it has been a lot as per most people. And are you planning to use the ICMR common forms in your institute? Most of them said yes, but we are still waiting for that to happen. I think the most important thing, usefulness of EEC has been in the time of the pandemic, because most of the times, and thanks to the ICMR guidelines for COVID-19 EC review processes, which Nandini mentioned, the need, we couldn't have physical meetings because of the lockdowns, etc. And that time EEC really proved useful, and that's what these people have said. One of my colleagues, Dr. Yashasri Shetty from KM Hospital Pharmacology Department, did a study in which they, mainly in our own institution, and we looked at they looked at the perception of investigators, and they said that the registration was easy. There was not too much difficulty. For example, there was no difficulty in logging in as PI in the e-software. The sufficient provision for uploading documents was there, as they said yes. Option for deleting or replacing documents was there. Uploading documents accepted by the administrative staff, 34 people out of which 29 said yes. Most of them received documents uploading successfully on dashboard. They receive it on the dashboard. I'll show you some of these things. Received changes in review status from time to time. Most of them said yes to this. Ease of uploading replies to EC queries was simple. Received an approval letter and preference for online submission of projects for EC review. What about EC members? Now the EC members are older, so they all had slightly more difficult. It was, I think, according to me. Difficulty, there was not much difficulty for logging in. And there was no confusion in the email IDs, because we are institutional members. It would have been perhaps, because we could be a PI and we could be an ethics committee member, but there was not much difficulty in that. Received the list of protocols as allotted, and able to save and upload the comments was also relatively easy. The member secretary and chair were also separately interviewed, and they felt that it was quite easy to register in as from the EC office, register as a member secretary or chairperson. Difficulty in logging in as was not, there was not much difficulty. Faced problem at times for registration. Well, we don't know what the difficulty was. As I told you, these people are very senior people and therefore they don't have intuitive relationships with their computers. So many of them did approach the EC office for help, received notification regarding assigned projects, and confusion for login was not there as much. Member secretary received all projects protocols, so they essentially could upload the minutes on time, they could work on time. Everything was done as per the requirements. And I'll share the next 2-3 slides will be to share the look of this EEC. This is how it looks. This is the principal investigator dashboard, and this is how you upload your documents. Sometimes if you use the common ICMR form, then it is really useful because you don't have to re-enter many things. The ethics committee, IEC admin will look like this: unapproved projects, resubmission, whatever the status is given over here. And initial submission. This is the dashboard of the ethics committee administration. The when we as a member, when the member logs in, you will find out which all the project documents are entered, and you enter the I, which will download that document for you. Not download it, you will just see it. You don't have to download everything. In short, it is a very easy way of, and we've added a help menu which gives you a step-by-step working of the step-by-step guidance. Addition of a section named recent upgrades, which helps the EEC team inform users of the changes and additions made. Added some features for increased security and confidentiality. For instance, password complexity and password history. And there is an addition of audit trail. All this will be useful also in the, if there is any audit, any auditing agency comes. When the NABH came, for example, to my institute, it was very good because they were able to go back and audit everything that the EEC had done. We upgrade EEC constantly to facilitate ethics review process. And our email IDs are given over here. Dr. Neha Chawla is in THSTR, and she is the one in charge of the agent from CDSA looking after this. You can write to eec@gmail.com if you are interested. And this is my email ID in case you are interested to have a demonstration. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Tate. That was, I am sure this has been a very useful introduction to the IRMI community, and I'm sure there will be a lot of queries and interest about this portal. Our next panelist is Dr. Aastha Aggarwal. Dr. Aggarwal has been invited particularly about sharing her experience in managing compliance in an institute like the Public Health Foundation of India. And I also request Dr. Aastha to highlight how this management and compliance adherence differs or aligns with from other areas of health research, and how with respect to social science research, how does it differ and align? And over to Dr. Aastha. Thank you.
Thank you, Vidya. Do you just want to check, do you first want me to cover about the ethics review process that we have at PHFI? Do you want me to first talk about that and then talk about the differences in social science research review?
Yes, please. Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay.
That's fine. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So basically, and I'll be just speaking out. I won't be using any slides. Hope that's okay. And right, so the journey that we began for the ethics review at PHFI began back in 2008 when the leadership at PHFI decided that we need to have an IEC of our own. That was a time when we were building up our institution and more studies were happening. So the leadership decided that we need to have an IEC of our own. And we were lucky to have the guidance and the vision of many people, many stalwarts, both internal to PHFI and external, who were experienced with the ethics review process. And more importantly, they understood the importance of having your own IEC and doing the research in an ethical way. So we were lucky to have them. And under their guidance, we set out to set up our own IEC, and there were various aspects that need to be addressed. As with any new entity, you need to tackle a lot of things. So there were a lot of aspects that we had to look at, and these included development of the SOPs, forms, and of course the registering with the appropriate authorities, government authorities, training the members and the researchers in the ethical research. So there were different aspects that we had to cover. And of course, we had the ICMR guidelines version 2006 to fall back on at that point in time. So with that framework, we started working on our SOP, and at that point in time, PHFI IEC was also catering to the studies that were being done by our affiliate institutions, Indian Institutes of Public Health, which now have their own IECs, but back in 2008, PHFI IEC was the main IEC. So we were developing our own SOPs and forms, and it was something that we were learning as we were going along, because PHFI get a lot of different kind of studies. So we have studies that range from looking at the economic aspects of health to purely social science aspects of health to studies that look at the biological aspects of health. So it's a very mixed bag. So we had to cater to all these kind of different studies, and we were developing our forms and SOPs accordingly, so that everything can be reviewed uniformly. And of course, we have now developed our own SOPs for the review process. We have our own forms, which are in alignment with the ICMR forms that Dr. Thate also mentioned about. And we have robust systems for periodic monitoring of the approved studies. There is a proper system for reviewing the amendments to the approved studies. And in terms of the training, we have undertaken a lot of initiatives to train not just our researchers, but also other project staff, because we believe that the responsibility of conducting the research ethically does not lie only with the investigators, but instead the actual project staff who are going to do the work, they need to be trained in the ethical conduct of research. So we spend a lot of time in training these people, and we do periodic workshops for training our research staff, for our training our members. We have made it mandatory for our ethics committee members and researchers and project staff to have ethics certification from some reliable source. So unless someone does not have ethics certification, they cannot apply to our IEC for review. If they're part of the study team, they have to have a valid ethics certification. In terms of registering our IEC with the government authorities, we registered our IEC with DCGI back in 2014, but then in 2019, the rules were changed by the Ministry of Health and Family Welfare, and now we are registered with the Department of Health Research. And we are also, many of our studies are also in the CTRI, that's Clinical Trial Registry of India portal. That's so that the study information is out there in the public database. We get a lot of NIH funds, so we are also we are also registered with the Office of Research Integrity under the Department of Health and Human Services, USA. And because I'm just following up after Dr. Thate, it's really important for me to mention that we also have a paperless system for the submission in the review process. We have an electronic system that was developed in-house. And our IT team and my colleague Lakpa, who's the Human Research Ethics Coordinator at PHFI, had a great role to play in it. And right. So that was some of the things in terms of how we developed our IEC. and it's a learning process, and we try to adapt ourselves to the changing needs. And now that PHFI exists in a lot of different locations, we have studies going on across different parts of the country, catering to different kind of funding sources and different kind of studies. We have realized that we need to work very closely with the research administration at PHFI, which we do, in order to ensure that the investigators are informed in a timely manner, that they need to submit for ethics approval. They need to know that there is something known as ethics approval that they need to take, because for a lot of reviewers, for a lot of researchers who are new to the field, uh, it's something that they do not understand immediately, the importance of ethics review, and that this is something that they need to go through. So we are working in close coordination with our research administration to ensure that there is continuous interaction with the researchers, there's continuous flow of information to the researchers, that this is something they need to do. And needless to say, the IEC, although it's under the umbrella of PHFI, it functions independently of the leadership in order to ensure that there is no bias in its functioning. We have both internal and external members. We have a mix of medical scientists, non-medical scientists, lay person, a lawyer, social scientist on the panel, and some of them are internal to PHFI and some are not affiliated to PHFI. And there have been a lot of people who are not working with PHFI anymore, who have contributed to this whole development of the process. And like I said earlier, we're trying to evolve with the changing times and the changing needs. So I guess I'll just pause here in terms of addressing the query about the journey that we have taken for the PHFI IEC. Vidya, would you want me to address something else related to that at this point?
Yes, Dr. Agarwal, what we want to understand is, like, when you're working on social sciences research, for example, in your committee, a social scientist will rather be in a scientist role rather than a non-scientist role, like what will happen in most other areas of research. So who is your non-technical member and how does it differ? One more question from one of my colleagues. Dr. Datta wants you to also specify what, when you mean ethics certifications, do you mean GCP certification or is there a specific ethics training? Thank you.
Okay, so I'll address that question first. So GCP certification, yes. So earlier we were subscribing to the City program, and they had different modules, which included the Good Clinical Practice module certification, which is essential. Now we have now we have subscribed to other online courses that offer GCP certification. But there are several institutions which have their own training for the ethics certification. And as long as it's from a reliable source, we are open to accepting that certification. The point being that the person who's submitting the application, the person who's going to be doing the study, should be aware of the ethical principles. That is the whole point of having the certification in place, right? So there are different sources from which one can get the certification. But GCP is, yes, one of the modules that they need to undertake.
Thank you.
And,
thank you, Doctor.
Yeah. Okay. And with regards to the social science research and the role of the social scientist, so the social scientist that we have in our committee, the person is not a non-technical person. In terms of the non-technical person, you have the lay person who can bring about the aspects that other technical people may overlook. But in terms of the social scientist, we have um, reputed social scientists on the panel. And I think because we are talking about research involving human participants, so there's of course some quantum of interaction with the humans, right? So this role of social scientists becomes really important, because especially given the diversity and the disparity that we have in our country. We have diversity in terms of the socio-cultural factors, which is known to everybody, right? We have disparity in terms of the economic background, social backgrounds, and we have disparity in terms of the backgrounds of the person who's conducting the study and the participants. And that is probably one of the biggest source of inducing bias in terms of ethics. So all these aspects are covered by the knowledge that a social scientist has. What they bring to the table, it's not just their technical information, but also they bring to the table perspectives of the community, of the population. They are sensitive to, they're aware of the local cultural and moral values, which as scientists, as researchers, we may overlook. It could be it would most likely be an unintentional mistake, but it does happen a lot of times. So a social scientist keeps us on track with respect to the community's perspectives. They are the champions of the community. Although everyone sitting on in the IEC, they want to protect the participants, but social scientists, by virtue of their qualification and experience, they are champions of the communities, of the population. So they bring their perspective. More often than not, they are able to tell a researcher would be the ideal way to approach the population, what would be disrespectful to the population, what kind of questions, basically how the questions should be asked. The same question can be asked in a way which would offend the community, and the researcher may not have even thought about it given their lack of understanding of the population. So these are the aspects that a social scientist would shed light on. They would also want to ensure that the findings and the benefits of the study are translated to the population in one way or the other. So these are some of the things that a social scientist would focus on and would want researcher and the IEC to pay attention to. And there are specific situations where the role of the social scientist becomes even more important, depending on the type of study that is being done, depending on the type of participants that a study is catering to, the kind of information it is, the kind of information that is being collected. So I'll stop here, and maybe if there are questions, I can address those questions.
Thank you, Dr. Aggarwal. We will take up the specific questions at the end of this session. I request now we will move on to the recorded session from Dr. Dhawan, who will majorly inform us about how it is to maintain compliance for stem cell research. I request the IT team of India Alliance to please share the recorded session that we had with Dr. Dhawan. Thank you.
Hello, Dr. Dhawan. It's very good to have you for this IRMI session on understanding regulatory mechanisms that should be in place for any institutional research. We are very happy to have you in talking about stem cell research and its how it has evolved in our country. And please, will you be share your experience in how the regulatory mechanisms have evolved in India for this very important aspect of research? Thank you.
Good afternoon, Vidya. Thank you so much for involving me in this important IRMI session on regulatory mechanisms. I'm delighted to be with you all. I think you've raised an important subject of how stem cell regulations have evolved in India. And, when we speak of stem cell research, I think we need to distinguish between the basic biology of how stem cells function to regenerate themselves, as well as to repair tissue damage. And for that research, there are two streams really that have led to that. And one is basic understanding of developmental mechanisms. And the second is an understanding of clinical applications. The one is necessary for the other. And what is interesting to note is that although, studies of embryonic stem cells or the so-called induced pluripotent stem cells grab the headlines today, actually much of our early understanding about stem cells came from studies of blood, because as you can imagine, blood is the system that repairs itself and has to regenerate itself every day. So to continue to provide its functions as a circulatory mechanism and as an immune system. So, today we have in India dozens of laboratories in the major institutes and universities and in clinics and hospitals where studies on stem cells are being undertaken. We also have dozens of medical centers where clinical applications of stem cell therapy are being sought. But the regulatory mechanisms really started about 20 years ago, I would say, when in the Department of Biotechnology, there was a dedicated stem cell task force set up by the secretary at the time, Professor M.K. Bhan, who recognized that it was very important that this new cutting-edge potential technology be not only understood well by basic researchers, but applied appropriately with all the clinical guidelines met and the regulations formulated in a manner that was specific for India. So while the early days of the stem cell task force were mainly focused on basic understanding, there were, even from the beginning, several clinical centers which had already been started to apply stem cell technologies. Now, you can imagine that those would mainly be the large centers like the AIIMS, the CMC Vellore, the Tata Memorial, etc., where stem cells were being used to understand and apply to cancer therapies and or to hematological disorders. So, today, for the last 10, 12 years, we also have a dedicated stem cell institute in STEM in Bangalore, where there are researchers who are delving deep into studying stem cells, as well as informing the public about their applications and seeking applications. But if we want to talk about the regulatory mechanism, how that evolved was for the Department of Biotechnology and the ICMR to come together after a period of discussion and independent funding of stem cell work, to come together and create what is called the National Apex Committee for Stem Cell Research and Therapy, the NAC-SCRT. Now, that is a body which is governed by both the members of, the scientific community who have been drawn onto that community, onto that committee by the DBT and the ICMR, as well as legal experts, ethical and regulatory experts. Now, as you may imagine, there is in a technology which involves the purification of stem cells and their transfusion back into patients, there are multiple layers of regulation that need to be present, right? Some simply overlap with the use of um, um, the ability to ensure that no harm is done in these methods, right? Because you can imagine the transfusion of cells is governed by a number of different biological and clinical parameters. So the oversight needs to be very strong that the clinical center that is undertaking these methods and using them as potential therapies needs to not only have a deep understanding of the technology, but also mechanisms in place to ensure that patients are brought in with correct informed consent and all of the other regulatory aspects that govern clinical research. And when I say research, even though the fact that there are one or two stem cell treatments that are true treatments in the sense that they are what's called standard of care, the vast majority of stem cell treatments are really experimental and must be done in the context of a trial. So that places certain constraints on the institution, not only in terms of having a proper knowledge and guideline, but also in terms of informing the patients that these are experimental treatments. So I'll stop here with this particular point. Perhaps I've sort of deviated from your original question, which is how the regulatory mechanism evolved. But as I just want to reiterate that the regulatory mechanism evolved out of discussions of the Department of Biotechnology and the ICMR with the scientific and clinical community to develop the NAC SCRT, which now has a very strong presence, has its web page and a process of certification of institutes, where every institute has to have, which is undertaking either research or therapy, has to have its own internal ICSCRT, the institutional committee, which has a mandated set of people to be associated with it, so that you have the appropriate expertise. And all research or therapeutic projects which are undertaken have to be cleared by the ICSCRT and registered with the NAC SCRT before they can actually take place. So this is a mechanism that has evolved.
Thank you, Dr. Dhawan. Some aspects of your response has already covered another question I had in mind, which is about the institutional compliances that should be in place to work with the stem cell researchers. So just one extension of that is like how much of the institutional mechanisms and the committees that are in place have to work with other committees, like for example, a biosafety committee or an institutional ethics committee, like how often they intersect, and and please highlight on that. And I would also like to touch upon a funder's perspective about the other compliance requirement. Thank you.
Right. Thank you, Vidya, for those questions. They're very pertinent. I just wanted to back up and say one more thing about the NAC SCRT, and that is that as a regulatory body which is located in Delhi and has a committee membership that examines the documents. It has a secretariat and people who examine the documents that are sent in by the institutional committees. The NAC SCRT has the ability to certify the institutional committees as being having the appropriate composition, as well as that their projects are appropriately framed and have met with all the other compliances, which I'll get to in a minute. But what is also important for regulators and people who are involved in institutes as well as in hospitals to recognize is that the NAC SCRT does not have the ability to make punitive, sort of, demands on the institute in the event that they fail to comply. So this is something that people need to be aware of, because while your certification may be cancelled, it is also the case that there are many hospitals, as we know, where stem cell therapy, I say this in quotes, is being provided to patients who may not have all the information in their hands. So there is still a possibility, and our regulations need to be strengthened in that regard. So now coming back to the issue of the institutional mechanisms that need to be in place and how the ICSCRT needs to work with other committees, statutory committees, to ensure that everybody's on the same page with respect to all of the different forms and compliances that need to be there. So as you rightly pointed out, you have an institutional human ethics committee who has to ensure that if there are any clinical collaborations between the institute and a clinical center, that the appropriate guidelines are followed, and that the certification for each project is obtained after submission to a committee. You also have the biosafety committees to ensure that not just that researchers themselves are protected, and that because of their handling of cellular components and components that might be used to engineer these cells, right? So in this, I say, because at least in basic research, not yet in clinical research, because gene therapy or engineered cell therapy has not yet been approved in the country. All of these would be studies of basic biological mechanisms, right? People working on cells in culture, whether they be human cells or drawn from mice or other animals or other model organisms. So you have to have institutional animal ethics also in place. So usually the most effective way to do this is for the institute to not only have each of these committees, which sometimes have overlapping composition, but you need a person or an office that actually harmonizes and coordinates these three or four committees, because without that, it becomes very difficult for the committees to provide effective service to the institute, and it becomes quite a strain the institute to organize all of these individual committees with different membership to ensure that all of these guidelines are met. So what I would suggest is that in the context of your seminar, that it be emphasized that having an individual, a person, usually a scientist or a senior manager, who coordinates all the committees is a very important step for an institute to take.
Thank you, Dr. Dhawan. And you have touched upon something very dear to our own IRMI concerns. So India Alliance has providing a good support for biomedical research in India. And as of from the funders' perspective, what will be your message for in general for maintaining for statutory compliance in all these institutes? You touched upon a very important point of having a person, a senior manager in place to so that there is smooth functioning. So would you like to add and elaborate more on this? Thank you.
Sure. Yeah. So I think the reason why it's important to have a person who coordinates all these committees is that when it's not just about the conduct conducting of the research itself under the appropriate regulatory framework. It's also about providing faculty who are preparing their grants for submission to be aware of what the regulatory framework is, and which of course they should be doing the due diligence to understand the regulations for the kinds of experiments that they are proposing. But sometimes it happens that people may be involved in collaborative work where they're not completely aware of what the guidelines are and may stray out of them. So it is important to have a person who has the information as well as the connection with the funding agencies, individuals within funding agencies who can provide, be resource persons to ensure that faculty prepare their proposals appropriately. And that has two sort of components to it. One is that the ethical constraints or the ethical framework under which the work is proposed must be unimpeachable. And the other is that the kinds of experiments that you're proposing also have a funding component which needs to be properly tackled. So in order to prepare realistic and well thought through proposals, I think the regulatory framework is something that needs to be taken care of and actually assists in helping the faculty member in preparing the proposal.
Dr. Dhawan, thank you very much. I think you have set the tone for our further sessions on this seminar, and I sincerely appreciate your participation and your response to all our queries in this IRMI webinar session. Thank you very much.
All right. With that, what we had planned was to start the flow with an introduction to the requirement of statutory compliances, followed it up by with respect to online system available and a public health setting and a stem cell research setting. The reason we thought of it is to set the tone for where the research managers will come in and play an important role working with the researchers in functioning the process, which we hopefully cover into the details of functions and operations subsequently in further IRMI sessions. This is to introduce to the community about what it involves and who are the monitors and how important it is for the research infrastructure. And our very excellent panelists have in fact given very important glimpses into this entire structure. So with that, I'll take up the queries from the from our participants. I'll start the queries to Dr. Tate. Dr. Tate, there is a query about whether the EEC portal, is it available only for the ICMR based research, or is it for also available for RCGM, ICSER and IAC?
For everybody and anybody. But I saw the questions in the chat box. I do not know if it will work for an animal ethics committee because I've not worked in an animal ethics committee, and I don't know therefore what their functionalities are, what their needs are. What I would suggest is that you write to Neha and talk to her and find out if this can be used by animal ethics committees as well. I think that is something that you can use.
The answer to this is
the question about ICMR doesn't come in. The ICMR forms, the common forms which have been created, Roli and all these people have come together and created, THSTI also was involved if I remember right. When they created these forms, these are just common forms that are useful for application of to ethics committees. So all the information that you otherwise have in your own individual forms is put in there and it is electronically available. So you can reuse the same form if you know you are applying again. So it is not for ICMR projects. It is for any project on human subjects.
Yes. Yes. You can configure your form into either ethics committee forms into this if you're not working with ICMR common
But
forms.
I don't think you can do that. You will then have to scan it and upload it. That's what we do right now. In my ethics committee, the investigators are scanning and uploading. So that facility is available. But if you want, you can use ICMR forms. And I've recommended to my committee to start using the ICMR forms. So let me see if that happens.
The ease is that it will allow you to fill it online. Dr. Tate, one more query from the audience. Yes. From the participants, they're asking about what all the regulatory approvals that should be in place for drug-related research.
For drug-related research, the most important is the drugs controller's permission, the DCGI approval. That is required, and the ethics committee has to be registered with the CDSCO. So the DHR registration will not work for the regulatory studies. For regulatory drug-related studies, you will have to be registered with the CDSCO. So if you have an ethics committee and if you're interested in doing regulatory research as well, then you will have to register with the CDSCO as well.
In continuation,
Sorry, I didn't hear you.
In continuation to that response, if it is a drug trial looking for a license, you have to work with CDSCO. If you're looking for academic research, then you have to inform your ethics committee takes a decision whether it has to be informed to the drug controller about
Academic clinical trial as defined in the New Drug and Clinical Trials Act. That is only when we inform the drugs controller. If we are doubtful of whether this is a purely academic or is it possibly, possibly it could have commercial interest, then we have to go to the DCGI. The ethics committee will have to go. But that is a definition of an academic clinical trial. There is a clear definition, and that definition is not just any academic trial, it is a clinical trial on a drug which is already approved for other indications, and now you are going to try it for a new indication in a new dose or in a new formulation. In that case, then you have to take, then it becomes an academic clinical trial, and it is not being done for licensing purposes or for any commercial. It will not be used, the results will not be used for any commercial activity.
Yes, thank you. One more question regarding the EEC is it a paid access service?
No, till today it was not paid, but we have finished the grant from BMGF, so we will have to now start getting subscriptions from the ethics committees. It has not been a good response from ethics committees when we said that you have to pay for it. It is not a lot. I think it was 10 or 15,000 per month, per year. That was calculated as the amount required with such a low number. If there were higher numbers of ethics committees which registered, I'm sure the requirements would be less, because the cost is only of keeping that Microsoft Azure, and CDSA can't take the cost anymore. So we have to generate our own funds, otherwise this whole enterprise will die.
Yes. Thank you, Dr. Pati. There is I would request Dr. Kumar to take up this question.
So
And
okay if I leave, because I have another meeting at 4:30 and I would like to leave with your permission.
Yeah, I think so, Dr. Savita. I think we can.
Yes.
We can. Okay.
Thank you so
Thank you very much.
It was a pleasure to be here with you all, and I hope that you enjoyed my discussion. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for
Thank you
joining.
for having me here. Thank you.
Thank you. The next query I request Dr. Kumar to address. This is about the because of the pandemic, the guidelines evolved, and then it allowed for an online conduct of meetings. And there is a query about whether this will become the norm, or the norm has been changed now so that people, the ethics committee meetings has to be in person?
I didn't hear the first half. I had some internet problem. Can you repeat?
Dr. Kumar, please? Yes, yes. The query is about the online conduct of meeting. Is this continuing, or is it going to become the norm, or is it going to be go back to in-person meetings for ethics committees or any regulatory committees?
Okay, so actually in 2017, when the third revision of ICMR guidelines were released, there was a 12th section on, humanitarian emergencies. So that is where, for the first time, it was actually um, stated that you could hold virtual meetings. And that became a reality when the COVID-19 pandemic broke out. And in 2020, when ICMR guidelines were released, this was taken up as a requirement. Now, that is not, a mandatory thing. You can always meet physically. Why it was prevented was to actually stop the onslaught of the pandemic, not getting people infected just because of the physical exposure. So there is nothing hard and fast about it. As far as possible, physical meetings can be encouraged because there are lots of things which you can clear when you are physically present rather than when you deal with it virtually.
All right, Dr. Chate. In fact, like sometimes it's much easier to conduct online meeting in my experience. It's like members are more willing and available to join. So I think the question stems from that fact. So
Yeah,
one more question.
experts, you can meet them because they can sit at their own homes and join. That is there. But there are also glitches, which actually mars the proceedings. The electronic glitches, just as I had in the beginning. Right.
So there is a query about the GCP training certificate, and there is a specific query. In fact, it's about ICH GCP, the module E6 or 2, which is the updated one offered by Global Health Network. Okay, is it a valid, accepted GCP certification? There is a specific query.
Yeah, it's a important query. Right now, India does not have any mandatory requirements that the training should be from certain agencies or certain institutions. That issue is not there. So therefore, if you have a certificate from any agency for that matter, you can go ahead with that. But now that CDSA is going to actually start the GCP certification, only those people who claim to train others would have to be certified for GCP. So this certification is on ISO basis, and it's probably the first time in the world that this is being done. So maybe in future, when things settle down more and more people actually get accustomed to the fact that one has to undergo GCP training and all that, then probably it may become mandatory to have the training from particular institutions.
Thank you, Dr. Kumar. So there is a specific question about registration of IECs from universities. Where should the IEC of universities should register? There's a query from one of the
DHR. IEC, if it has to deal with personal protection, participant protection, it has to register with Department of Health Research. And if it comes under the purview of the regulator, then CDSCO. And if that EC reviews both types of proposals, then it has to register in both CDSCO as well as DHR. But in university, you generally don't expect regulatory clinical trials, but you cannot say, because say, for example, Manipal University or any medical universities, they are also universities, but you can have clinical trial sites. So in that case, they will have to register both with CDSCO and DHR.
Thank you, Dr. Kumar. The next set of questions are to Dr. Astha Aggarwal. Dr. Aggarwal, the participants are very interested in knowing the names of the agencies where you have obtained your certification from, and there is an interest in understanding your sharing your experience with registration with DHR, and also a query on yoga research and is it necessary to register the institute with DHR. I'll go one by one. You can start with the naming the certification agencies that you had. Thank you.
Thank you, Vidya. So the earliest certification that we had registration was with DCGI back in 2014, because at that point in time, that was the only body that was providing the certification. But now, since 2020, we are now registered with DHR, and DHR has this method where they give 2 years provisional registration followed by a registration valid for 5 years. So right now we are under the time period where we have the provisional certification from DHR, and then hopefully now we are going to have the long-term certification from them.
Yes, thank you, Dr. Aggarwal. And the next query about registering an yoga institute with DHR, is that essential? And also your experience about, I think basically this is a question about walking through the steps of registering with DHR. Maybe you can give an outline of it. The much detailed response can be requested over an email, but you can please help the participant to understand the steps and more. Thank you.
Sure. So in terms of registering the EC of a yoga research institute, I think, so I don't know about the kind of studies that you do, but I'm assuming that a lot of your studies will look at the impact of yoga on health, right? So, and by the notice issued by the DHR, it says any EC which reviews studies involving biomedical or health studies should be registered with them. So in short, the answer would be yes. I think you would need to register your EC with DHR. And in terms of, sorry.
Can I respond to that?
Yes, please.
Because all traditional system institutions, whichever have the IECs, have to register with DHR.
Right. So I guess, yes, you have to get your EC registered with DHR. In terms of our experience with registering with DHR, we started the process when the portal was newly launched. So they have an online portal. It's an online system that you have to use. And there were, of course, technical glitches in the beginning when we had tried to apply. But once those technical glitches were taken care of, the process was straightforward. We were supposed to upload the different SOPs. They had a list of SOPs that we were required to provide, along with the list of our members. And they have a whole list of documents that need to be provided. Once that was done, we were immediately issued the 2-year provisional certificate. And since then, they have raised queries based on our submission. And once we address them satisfactorily, they will issue the long-term certification. So it was pretty straightforward. But like Vidya said, if you need details, you can get in touch with me over email. I'll be happy to share the information.
Yes. So just in addition, in adding to that, it basically follows a provisional certification for 2 years. At the end of that period, there is a requirement to update your certification if it has not been updated, certification of your ethics committee members. And like if there is a SOP that needs to be modified, and if you have any change in the committees, and following those responses, there is a email response that is sent to you, and a reminder to be that you have to update your responses. And following that, with a short scrutiny, they will provide you a complete certification for 5-year period. So you're registered with FIRE, and now you have to mind that this is the committee that is registered under the new drugs and clinical trials rules, and the same way as your other ethics committee functions. That is the difference.
And also you have to provide, sorry, Vidya, just adding to that, also you have to provide the list of studies that you have reviewed, the kind of studies that your EC has reviewed so far. So that's also the kind of information that you need to provide while submitting the information to the portal.
Dr. Astha, there is a request to share your email ID. So Dr. Savita, I think we have covered the queries in the chat box. Yes, Dr. Aggarwal.
Sorry, with your permission, can I take just 1 minute to highlight a couple of points that you had asked me regarding the social science aspect, the studies that deal with social science research? Can I just take 1 minute to highlight a couple of important aspects?
Sure.
Yes, please.
Okay, thank you. So, although all studies related to health research will have some component of social science, however, studies that are more focused on social science would have things like you may have incidental findings during the study. So, for example, if your study relates to the impact of domestic violence on the health of the woman, for example, that's the study that you are working on, then the incidental finding could be that you find out that there's a real threat to the life of your participant. So now the question comes, how are you going to address that kind of situation? What are you going to do? So these are some of the aspects that are very pertinent to social science research, and how you're going to address them. These needs to be addressed in your protocol. And an ethics committee would ask the investigator to think about these aspects and have a protocol in place on how to address these things. There could be that your questions cause trauma to the participants. It could be that you are asking questions about their mental health, about the abuse that they have faced in life, and things like that. So you can't just ask the questions, get your data, and leave. No. So the ethics committee would want you to look at what kind of support system can you provide to the participants if that is the case. So these are some of the questions that are very pertinent to social science research, and also it is different from basic science because many of the things will evolve in the field, something that you won't be able to anticipate beforehand. So there could be a back and forth with the EC. You need to keep them updated about what you have found, what you need to change in your protocol. That becomes really important. And also in social science studies, a lot of times you're collecting qualitative data. So there would be scope for audio video recording, which you will be doing a lot. So you need to take specific consent for that from the participants. So these are just some of the issues that are quite particular to the social science studies that you may be planning to do or doing already. I'll stop here. Thank you, Vidya.
Thank you. Dr. Savita, I have exhausted the queries that are in the chat box. Should we open the floor, or may I just hand it over to you for the further sessions that you have in mind?
Sure, sure. So, well, first of all, a huge thanks to all our panelists and to Vidya, of course. This is a really vast subject. There are so many nuances to this, and it's actually really difficult to condense everything into a 1.5 hour session. But we hope that today's session, excuse me, has given you a good sense what this field is about and also how institutions can enable this very important process. So I think Vidya will bring the webinar per se to a close, and I think Abdul has shared a feedback form in the chat box, and I please request all the attendees to fill out the feedback form because this will be very helpful for developing the IRMI initiative further. And I'd just like to also take a minute to draw attention for the attendees to other things that are being planned for IRMI. Excuse me. So we have a conference coming up, and yeah, the conference will be taking place in October. There's a call for abstracts that's open, and we'd very much like to hear from the community about how research management can enable research in India. So we look forward to hearing from you about that. And I'd also like to invite my colleague, Dr. Madhuri Datta. Madhuri would like to share a small announcement. Madhuri, over to you.
Thank you so much. I'm just sharing my slide, but I just want to thank Vidya and IRMI for bringing this wonderful session on ethics, actually. So important, and because we are all a part of the ethics committees, we understand the importance and the regulations that keep changing and how we should sort of conform ourselves to that. I hope you can see my slide. I'm just going to, yeah. Is this okay?
All good.
Okay, all right, thank you. So I want to talk about something else, but because Savita alluded to the IRMI conference, I want to say that last year when I presented at the IRMI conference, it just opened a lot of networking opportunities for me, and I could, network with a host of colleagues internationally as well. And this particular project started during that time. So sorry about that. So, as you know, Dr. Simon Kerridge, he is in the committee of IRMI and he is an esteemed member. And he was there in the IRMI conference last time. And he sort of contacted me after the IRMI conference because I was interested in data, especially data from the research managers in India, because we don't really have too many, surveys going around for ourselves or to put our voice through to others for changing policies and systems within us, within our organizations, and within our career. And so Simon actually was working on this particular international survey called as Research Admin as a Profession, or the RAP survey. And he asked me to be a part of it. And this opportunity came solely because I presented at the IRMI conference and because of IRMI. So this international conference, international survey actually started in 2015, wherein the NQRA, or as you know, the association in the US, that sort of supported a survey by international research managers worldwide. And this survey covered around 2,691 RMAs. And this was the responses got were from 64 countries. And again in 2018, the RAP2 survey was done, and this was endorsed by INORMS. I think all of us have heard of INORMS. And this survey actually covered responses, around 4,324 responses from 74 countries. And at that time, IRMI was initiating, and we could actually 17 responses were obtained from India. Now we are running that survey. It is open right now, and it has a deadline of 15th March. So this is the RAP 3 round. 2021 was when we started designing the survey, and now it is open. And I'm requesting all of you to put in your response to this survey. The link is here. I'll put it in the chat box as well. Um, Now, why is this survey important? Because it gives us country-wise details about research managers, data regarding the academic qualifications needed for research managers, the certificate courses they have taken or the training programs they have taken. Also, what is their employment with their organization? Is it long-term or is it contractual? And career path of the research managers. And also this time, the survey will cover leadership journeys. So we'll be doing a lot of case studies with leaders in our field and learning from them about how they sort of sustained their career. And why do we need this data? Because this data is going to not only be useful in policies that our organizations can implement, but also it will give us an opportunity to understand what kind of courses and trainings are important, especially for India-based research managers. So with that, I actually want to hand over to Savita. And thank you, Savita, and thank you, IRMI, for the opportunity of bringing this survey to all of us. Thank you.